Welcome to Night Sleep Stories, where we listen, relax, and drift to sleep. I'm your host, Artur. Thank you for being here. Settle in, get cozy wherever you are, because tonight's story is a long one. The Aeneid is an extraordinary epic poem, the Roman counterpart to the Iliad and the Odyssey. It carries us from the ruins of Troy to the foundations of the Roman Empire. There will be adventure love, divine interventions, wars, prophecies, and even a journey to the underworld. You'll also hear about Virgil, the author of the Aeneid, and the work's cultural and political significance. I'll read it to you. This version was written by our friend, the French Whisperer, who runs a YouTube channel. Now, my friends, make sure you're nicely settled, calm, in. If you've listened to the show for a fair while, you've probably heard me mention my own struggles with sleep that I've dealt with for most of my life. As tough as it can be to admit to those challenges myself, I do feel that I've gradually learned to deal with it better and better as time has gone by. And especially recently, my sleep has improved quite significantly, which I'm grateful for. Of course, I can lean into my experiences and, in doing so, hopefully help you overcome any sleep troubles of your own. One thing is sure. If you're lying awake at night with a head full of noise and a sense of frustration, I've been there many, many times. And I know that, quite frankly, it's awful. So, whatever brought you to this show, be it to find an antidote to your sleep struggles or simply a source of comfort, just know that you're one of many thousands of listeners. Though I'd love it if we could all sleep soundly every night, I do think it's also reassuring to know we're not alone when we're having a tough time of it. So, with that being said, let's enjoy a few soothing deep breaths. Draw in a calming, full breath, hold at the top, and gently release, letting go of worry or tension. Breathe in again, hold, and let it go. One more time together. Breathe in calmly, hold and exhale any worries or tension as you begin to drift into a deeper state of relaxation. Allow yourself to be reassured that you're one of many who will be listening along tonight. And now, it's time that we turn to our story. So, let's go back thousands of years to a city called Troy. This is where our story begins. It all began in Troy at a pivotal moment of the Trojan War. The Trojans believed they had won their decade-long struggle against the Greeks. Yet in truth, they stood on the brink of losing everything. You may know the Trojan War from the Iliad and the Odyssey. Kings and cities from across Greece gathered to attack powerful Troy on the far side of the Aegean Sea. But Troy was well protected behind its high walls defended by renowned heroes and even favored by certain gods, Poseidon, Neptune to the Romans, Aphrodite, also called Venus, and Apollo. The Trojans held out. The city seemed as if it would never fall. The Greeks could not break the fortifications, and the besiegers were growing impatient. After 10 years of fruitless assaults on Troy, Odysseus, also called Ulysses, conceived a plan. The Greeks built a large wooden horse on wheels and suddenly, overnight, appeared to abandon the beach beneath the city walls, or so it seemed. Only one man remained on the shore as the Greeks pretended to sail away. His mission was to convince the Trojans that the enemy had given up the fight, which would mean Troy had won the war. He also wanted them to believe the horse was an offering to Neptune, god of the seas and of horses. But this was, of course, a trap. The wooden horse was hollow, and inside it hid Ulysses and a band of chosen warriors, waiting for the Trojans to drag the statue behind their walls. The Trojans hesitated. The Greeks were nowhere to be seen, and what risk could there be in accepting a wooden statue, a gift to one of their gods? The Greek agent insisted that accepting the offering would win Neptune's favor, even enabling them to conquer Greece itself. Still, after 10 years of ruinous war, doubts remained, especially for a priest named Laocoon. He saw through the ruse and urged his fellow citizens to destroy the horse at once. When they ignored his warning, Laocoon took matters into his own hands and hurled his spear at the statue. Then 2 serpents, sent by the gods, suddenly rose from the sea and devoured him. The Trojans took this as punishment for disrespecting an offering to Neptune. But the gods had not sent the snakes to help Troy. They had already decided the city must fall. Unaware of this, impressed by the show of divine power, the Trojans hauled the statue behind their fortified walls and began to organize festivities to celebrate their victory. The Trojans, feeling safe, were oblivious to danger, convinced nothing could happen behind their walls. After nightfall, the armed Greeks slipped from the wooden belly where they had hidden all day and silently opened the city's gates. Outside, the Greek army had returned and now stood ready to enter the defenseless city. As these events unfolded, one of Troy's princes and heroes, Aeneas, slept at home. Aeneas was of the highest Trojan nobility. His father Anchises was a prince of Troy, and his mother was the goddess Venus, who always watched over her son. Aeneas had fought bravely throughout the war, protected by his skill and his divine mother, and he had survived. That night, while the Greeks began to overrun the city, Aeneas slept, and the Trojan hero Hector appeared to him in a dream. Hector had recently died, at the hands of Greece's most formidable warrior, Achilles. In the dream, Hector's shade urged Aeneas to flee the city immediately with his family. The gods had made their plans and decided that Troy would fall. Yet, in their councils, Venus had obtained protection and a future for her son, a future so brilliant that Aeneas's name would become immortal and his deeds celebrated for centuries. For that destiny to unfold, Aeneas first had to escape the city's destruction. At first, when Aeneas awoke, he joined the battle and tried to fight the Greek invaders. But soon he saw the truth of the situation. Trojan warriors were falling one after another, and the city was engulfed in fire and smoke. After witnessing the death of Priam, the old king of Troy, Aeneas accepted that the war was lost. Then his mother, Venus, appeared. She led Aeneas back to his house, where his family waited anxiously. His son Ascanius, his wife Creusa, and his father Anchises. All agreed on the need to escape and quietly made their way toward the city gates through the chaos Troy had become. When they reached the open way, Aeneas realized that his wife Creusa was no longer with them, and he went back into the city to search for her. Instead of finding Creusa, he encountered her ghost. Creusa's spirit told Aeneas that he should follow his destiny, travel west, pass through trials, temptations, and perils, but ultimately find kingship and a new royal spouse awaiting him. After losing his city and his wife, Aeneas was heartsick, but his father and his son had survived. With encouragement from his divine mother, Aeneas found the strength to rally a few other survivors and flee the burning city. The Greeks were now celebrating their triumph, but the survival of Aeneas and his companions were the seeds of a new empire, one that, by the will of the gods, would surpass anything the Trojans or even the Greeks could have imagined. Across many generations, the creation of Rome would be the phoenix rising from the ashes of Troy. After their escape, the survivors prepared to set sail. They built a fleet of ships and decided to accompany their new leader, Aeneas, on his journey west. This band of refugees was closely watched by the gods. On their side stood Troy's protectors, Neptune, Venus, and Apollo. Others were neutral or openly hostile, like Juno, Hera to the Greeks, queen of the gods, and wife of Jupiter. Under the eyes of the immortals, Aeneas and the other survivors began their wanderings across the Aegean and Mediterranean seas. To begin with, they landed in Thrace, near Troy, where they found the last traces of another Trojan warrior and hero. Then they arrived on the island of Delos, a holy sanctuary of Apollo. Delos was welcoming and peaceful. After the exhausting ordeal they had just endured in Troy, the group was tempted to stay. But Apollo told them to leave. This was not the place where the gods intended them to build their city. So Aeneas's group sailed to Crete, where they thought they had reached their destination. They started to build a settlement, the future city. But as soon as they began to build, disease struck. Then Aeneas had a dream in which Apollo told him that this was the wrong place and that they should depart. With no other choice, they abandoned the settlement and sailed west. On their next stop, on an island west of Greece, they encountered a harpy, a monstrous being, half bird and half woman. The harpy ordered them to leave her island immediately and uttered a prophecy. Aeneas and the other survivors would reach Italy one day, but they would not truly recognize it until hunger drove them to eat their tables. With this gloomy omen, the group resumed their wanderings, this time landing in Epirus, in the north of Greece. Aeneas's company were not the only survivors of Troy. Others had managed to escape and had traveled to Epirus. There they had begun to build a city that replicated Troy, hoping it would give them a second home and soothe their homesickness. This group of Trojans included Andromache, Cassandra, and Helenus, a son of King Priam of Troy, who possessed the gift of prophecy. Helenus delivered a new oracle. Not only would Aeneas's descendants prosper in Italy, they would also rule the entire world. But Epirus was not their promised land, and so the group set sail once again. Not all the gods watching Aeneas were benevolent. Among their enemies stood Juno, wife of Jupiter. Juno opposed the Trojans and Venus because long ago she had been humiliated. Before the Trojan War, 3 goddesses, Juno, Minerva, and Venus, appeared before Prince Paris of Troy, competing for his favor. Paris had to decide which of them deserved a golden apple. Each offered a lavish reward. Juno promised kingship and power. Minerva, strength and glory. Venus, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Venus, believing that the highest prize a man could hope for was everlasting, perfect love. He was promised Helen, the Greek queen, though she was already married. Paris abducted Helen and brought her to Troy, and war began. Venus took the Trojan side. Juno and Minerva sided with the Greeks. You might think Paris's death and Troy's total destruction would have satisfied vengeance, but not Juno's. She nursed grudges for a very long time. She had never been one to forgive, whether for Paris's judgment or for her husband's infidelities. Even after all these years, Juno remained angry and jealous of Venus, and she kept plotting against the Trojans. Which brings us back to Aeneas. Because of this anger, Juno was determined to prevent Aeneas and his people from reaching their destination and founding a new city. She also had another motive. The other gods had accepted that Aeneas and his companions would travel west and lay the foundations of Rome. And it was foretold that Rome would one day rival and destroy Juno's favorite city, Carthage. For that reason, she resolved that Aeneas should never reach Italy, never found a city, and that she would win her revenge against Venus, the mother of Aeneas. Her moment to strike was approaching. By now, Aeneas's expedition had drawn closer to Italy, but they were not there yet. They were near Sicily, the large island south of the peninsula. There they faced trials reminiscent of Ulysses' adventures in the Odyssey. Near Sicily, their ship had to pass through a narrow strait, a particularly perilous place between the powerful whirlpool Charybdis and the sea monster Scylla. Forced off course and away from Italy, they came ashore in the land of the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants, and narrowly escaped Polyphemus, the very Cyclops whom Ulysses had recently tricked on his own journey home. Soon after, Aeneas's father, Anchises, died of old age. Then the fleet was suddenly caught in an unexpected storm. Juno chose this moment to unleash her wrath. She held no command over sea or wind, so she approached Aeolus, the ruler of the winds, and asked him to stir up a tempest. Aeolus had no reason to obey or to take sides among the gods. So Juno offered a bribe. She ruled over many lovely sea nymphs and promised the fairest of them to Aeolus as a wife. The Lord of the Winds accepted. Very soon, as Aeneas's fleet tried to steer back toward Italy, trouble struck. Black clouds massed overhead, winds howled from every quarter, and the storm shattered and scattered the ships. The Trojans were saved only by Neptune's intervention. The god of the seas, angered by Juno's trespass in his domain, calmed the waters to rescue the desperate fleet. The ships regrouped and took shelter on the coast of North Africa near a recently founded city ruled by a powerful queen. The city was Carthage, and its queen was Dido. Remember the prophecy. Carthage would one day become a great imperial rival and enemy to Rome. But who could have believed that at this moment, when Carthage had only just been founded by Phoenicians far from their eastern homeland, and Rome did not even exist? After a time, while crews repaired ships and searched for food, Aeneas ventured into Carthage. He knew Juno was the city's patroness and that her temple stood there. He hoped to appease her by offering devotion. In Juno's temple, he met the queen, the gracious Dido. Aeneas still mourned his wife, yet after seeing Dido's beauty and poise, a long, quiet flame rekindled within him. The queen, herself a widow, was struck by the Trojan leader's bearing and bravery. Venus knew the Trojans needed respite before continuing, and Carthage was the perfect refuge, but she sought help. She summoned her son, Cupid, who can kindle love in mortal hearts. Disguised, he appeared as a guide to Aeneas, bearing gifts for Dido. The queen responded with a banquet in honor of her Trojan guests. And there, Cupid sparked love for Aeneas in Dido's heart. The threads of tragedy began to entwine. The two were drawn to each other, yet prophecy set young Carthage against Rome yet to come. Juno saw an opening to bargain with Venus. She proposed a pact. She would leave Aeneas unmolested if he stayed with Dido. Thus, he would be diverted from his destiny in Italy. Rome would never be founded, and Carthage would never fall. Venus cared about her son's happiness, and, after all his suffering since Troy's fall, was inclined to accept at least a period of peace. The Trojans enjoyed Dido's hospitality, and their leader felt no urgency to depart. One day, on a hunt, a sudden storm drove Aeneas and Dido to shelter in a grove where they consummated their love. They were overjoyed to have found each other and wished for nothing more than marriage and a shared life. But the other gods were displeased to see Aeneas forget the destiny they had set. Jupiter sent his messenger, Mercury, to remind the Trojan prince of his duty. Aeneas recognized the tragic dilemma before him: to fulfill his calling at the cost of his own happiness and that of the woman he loved. He hesitated, but he would not defy the gods. Unable to face Dido, he slipped away in secret one night, his heart broken by the choice he had made. Dido's heart, too, was broken when she discovered his departure. Life lost all meaning. She ended her life, and with her final words, she foretold unending strife between her people and his. Thus, another prophecy began to unfold. Rome and Carthage would be mortal enemies, and only Carthage's destruction would end their rivalry. Once again, mortals were pieces on the board of the gods. Aeneas, having chosen duty over desire, proved himself worthy of his fate. The voyage resumed. The expedition sailed north and returned to Sicily, not far from the waters where the storm had scattered them months earlier. They honored Anchises with funeral games on the anniversary of his death. While the men were absorbed in the contests, Juno kept scheming. Her accord with Venus had ended when Aeneas left Carthage and Dido. Now she would do anything to keep him from Italy and from founding Rome. She sent a messenger disguised as an old woman to incite the Trojan women to burn the ships, a fire that would end the journey forever. Seeing the fleet ablaze, Aeneas fell to his knees and prayed to Jupiter. The king of the gods sent a rainstorm to quench the flames and save the ships. But the gods do nothing without price. Jupiter demanded a life in return for safe passage. Soon after, the helmsman of Aeneas's ship was gently lulled by Somnus and slipped overboard. Jupiter had taken his due. Earlier, Aeneas had seen his father in a vision, instructing him to go to the underworld to behold a vision of the future. Protected by Jupiter, the fleet at last made landfall in southern Italy, near the site of a future city close to Naples. In a small town lived a powerful prophetess, the Sibyl of Cumae, who presided over Apollo's oracle. She glimpsed the future, knew the ways of the gods, and could guide the living into the realm of the dead. Aeneas asked her aid, and together they descended to the land of shadows. First, they passed crowds of souls along the river Acheron. To continue, the dead had to pay Charon, the ferryman, to reach the far bank. Those who could not pay waited for thousands of years in loneliness and tedium before they would be allowed to cross. The Sibyl knew these paths. She paid Charon, and they crossed swiftly, slipping past Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guards the underworld. Few living mortals ever entered the underworld, fewer still returned. But Aeneas had that rare privilege. He beheld Tartarus, where the wicked suffer without end. The Sibyl warned him to obey the gods if he wished to avoid such a fate. Aeneas felt relief that he had left Carthage and followed the divine command. Then he was led to the green fields of Elysium, where the worthy dwell eternally in joy and peace. There he found the spirit of his father, Anchises, and received a prophetic vision of Rome's destiny, not merely a city, nor even a kingdom, but an empire fated to encircle the world. To grasp the Aeneid fully, we should pause and see it in context and meet its author, Virgil. The poem was composed over roughly 10 years, about 2 millennia ago, between 29 and 19 BCE. By then, Rome had already begun a remarkable rise as a military, cultural, and political force. Politically, the state was shifting from the old republic toward a more openly imperial order. The institutions of the republic still existed on paper, yet true power was concentrating in the hands of emperors and their heirs. At the time of the Aeneid's composition, the new ruler was Augustus, Julius Caesar's successor, who had defeated Mark Antony, Cleopatra, and all remaining rivals to gather authority after years of civil war. The Republic had fallen in all but name, and that long turmoil had scarred society. People craved stability. Confidence in Rome's greatness had been shaken. Augustus understood this. He wanted to consolidate power, restore pride and traditional Roman virtues, and create a sense of continuity and unity. So, When Virgil began the Aeneid, he did so with the support of Rome's highest patrons. The poem was literature meant to move and delight, and it also served another purpose. In part, it functioned as statecraft, a work of persuasion. Though the Aeneid tells the tale of Rome's origins, it was never offered as strict history. Romans understood it as myth. Virgil had clear motives for telling it this way. By casting a hero of high moral measure as the founder of Rome and linking him to the ruling line, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, he could galvanize readers, infuse Rome's story with epic grandeur, and help knit fractured society together. A famous and older legend of Rome's birth is the story of Romulus and Remus. Virgil includes that tradition, weaving it into his epic alongside many pre-existing figures and tales from Greek and Roman lore. Greek culture, of course, loomed large for Romans. The Iliad and the Odyssey were foundational texts everyone learned. Beyond literature, Greek religion, architecture, language, logic, and philosophy shaped the educated Roman mind. Yet Roman feelings toward Greece were ambivalent. They admired and embraced Greek heritage, while also seeing themselves as different, perhaps more successful. After all, it was Rome, not Greece, that had mastered the Mediterranean. By the late 1st century BCE, much of the old Greek world and a vast portion of Alexander's former empire lay under Roman administration. The Aeneid reflects this blend. It draws deeply on Homer and is full of Greek references, and yet, in Virgil's telling, Rome's forebears are Trojans, the very foes of the Greeks, who, centuries later, gain a kind of poetic revenge. This habit of honoring vanquished enemies was typical of Rome. Praising the dignity of the conquered only magnified Rome's own achievement in prevailing. They did it with Carthage and with other rivals as their power spread. Still, the Aeneid is more than persuasion. It is a masterwork of storytelling and poetry, nearly 10,000 lines long. Today, it may be less widely dramatized than Homer's epics, with fewer films or series directly inspired by it, and its characters may be less instantly familiar. But that was not always so. For centuries, the Aeneid stood at the center of learning and was regarded as Latin literature's crown. In the Middle Ages and early modern era, it was arguably the most important original Latin work. To Latin what the Odyssey was to Greek. And its episodes echoed through novels, plays, and operas. Think of Purcell's Dido and Aeneas, or Berlioz's grand opera, The Trojans. Each retells parts of this story, each version a little different. Another point, Virgil also borrowed structure from Homer. The Aeneid is not told in simple chronological order. It begins in the middle of things, in medias res. then reveals the past through flashbacks as characters recount their trials. As in the Odyssey, we learn what has already happened because a hero tells the tale. In fact, Virgil opens with a rush. Aeneas and his ships are caught in the storm Juno provokes. At once, we're in the thick of action. After the storm, the Trojans make land for repairs on Africa's coast near Carthage, where Aeneas meets Dido and recounts everything from Troy's fall to their wanderings, the very events you've just heard. After that, the narrative returns to a linear path from Carthage toward Italy and the struggle to lay Rome's first stones. There are 12 books in the Aeneid. So far, we have only traversed 3. Now, let us return to the tale. Aeneas and the Sibyl returned from the underworld to the world of light. Inspired by the vision Anchises had revealed, an empire destined to circle the world, Aeneas led the Trojans deeper into Italy. In Latium, he chose a place to settle, but the land was not empty. It was ruled by the Latins under King Latinus. Latinus had a daughter, Lavinia, already promised to Turnus, the leader of the Rutuli. Yet, before the Trojans came, Latinus had received a message from the gods. Foreigners would arrive, and he must give his daughter to them, not to Turnus. The gods had laid the groundwork for peace. Juno, however, still watched, displeased that Aeneas drew close to success. From the underworld she summoned the Furies, deities of vengeance, to inflame strife between locals and newcomers. One Fury stoked the Queen of Latium, urging that Lavinia be given to Turnus, not Aeneas. Soon, despite Aeneas's wish to avoid bloodshed, hostility broke into open war, long and bitter. Aeneas lacked soldiers and sought allies. In a dream, he was encouraged to seek the Etruscans, enemies of the Rutuli. They agreed to fight at his side. So did a band of Greek Arcadians, whom Aeneas met upon the site where Rome would one day stand. Then only 7 hills rising above the landscape. The Rutuli too gathered friends, including fierce Amazons, warriors devoted to Diana, unmatched in battle. Meanwhile, Venus looked to her son's safety and asked her husband Vulcan, master of the forge, to craft arms worthy of Aeneas. Juno, relentless, sent word to Turnus that Aeneas was away from camp. Turnus seized the chance, led an assault, and breached the gate, yet the Trojans rallied and pressed him back. It was only a foretaste. The greater clash lay ahead. In heaven, Juno and Venus pleaded with Jupiter, each for her chosen side. But the king of gods decreed that mortals must prove their own worth. The goddesses were to stand aside. Aeneas returned with Etruscan and Arcadian allies, and a grueling battle shook the fields. Champions fell on both sides. No army prevailed. A truce allowed honors for the dead. A brief stillness, then fighting resumed. Wishing to end the slaughter, Turnus proposed single combat, a duel to settle the war. But Aeneas's superiority was plain, and the Rutuli feared for their king. In the end, Aeneas compelled the contest. Turnus faced him and fell. Here the poem stops, unfinished. Some closing lines are fragmentary, no formal conclusion survives, yet the scene aligns with what Virgil likely intended: Aeneas victorious, securing the Trojans' triumph with their allies, and at last free to found the city. From these foundations, the Roman kingdom, the republic, and the empire would flourish. Their descendants would include Romulus and Remus. In later centuries, the ancient patrician houses, among them the line of Julius Caesar and his adopted son, Augustus. The mingling of Italic peoples with the Trojans would bring forth the Romans, a nation destined to inhabit and to rule from one of the most extraordinary cities ever built. And that is where our tale grows quiet, the close of a hero's long journey. Settle in now. Let your breath grow soft and even, and drift toward a gentle, restful sleep. Good night and sweet dreams.